I'm here to help unravel matters as the insanity swirls. And unravel I shall. What happened to Omarosa, by the way? What happened to John Brennan and his security clearance? You see how quickly the media jumped from one supposed scandal to the next? They grab one, then the other, hoping somehow, some way that one of them will bring down this president. So Michael focused on the Michael Cohen matter. An impeachment. What was once considered the nutty rantings and ravings of a nut job by the name of Maxine Waters has now gone mainstream in the media. They want the president impeached. They've always wanted him impeached. If they could, they'd have him hanging from a telephone pole by his foot, as we've discussed before. But that's not in the cards. Now we have this breaking story that some guy named Weisselberg, who was the CFO of Trump Foundation and Trump Organization and whatever, that now he has been granted immunity, like the head of the National Enquirer, Pecker, has been granted immunity to, among other things, confirm what Michael Cohen has said about the President of the United States making payments or ordering payments on these non-disclosure agreements before he was president. As a legal matter, listen to me, as a legal matter, it's of zero consequence. Because in the end, the Department of Justice acknowledges, as does the special counsel, that a sitting president cannot be indicted. So that's relevant, isn't it? So as a legal matter, it's irrelevant. So what's going on here? We discussed it yesterday. What these prosecutors have decided, Mr. Mueller, and what's-his-face, the deputy U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. You know why the deputy U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York is in charge of these cases? Because the U.S. attorney has recused himself. My point to you was that Donald Trump is now the only citizen in the United States who can't defend himself. Now you might say, well, then he should allow that a president can be indicted. He has to defend the office of the presidency and the Constitution. So for him, it's not about him personally. But for the prosecutors, it is about him personally. And this is how they think, very cleverly, that they're boxing him in. And so when I hear supposedly smart people on TV and radio with law degrees, some of them are professors, some of them were professors, some of them were prosecutors, some of them were defense counsel, some of them were lobbyists, some of them were nobodies. Go on and on about the niceties of the campaign laws of which they know nothing. It really is frustrating. Because what's happened here is diabolical and evil. Mr. Mueller concedes the president can't be indicted. Southern District of New York must take the same position. Ultimately, they report to the United States Department of Justice. And so they're piling on. And they're not piling on through actual trials in the case of the Southern District of New York. See, the trial that took place with Manafort has absolutely nothing to do with the President of the United States. But if they had taken Cohen to trial and tried this argument that the President of the United States, in making these payments, knowingly or later knowingly, is guilty of these campaign violations, they'd have to prove it. They would have to demonstrate that these are in fact campaign violations, that in fact the law is as the prosecutor says. But the Southern District of New York is filled with cowards. Bullies, but in the end cowards. Because they wanted to deal with Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen wanted to deal with them. Because Michael Cohen didn't want to go to prison for 30 years. 3 to 5, that's all right. And there's some reports that say that his wife would have gotten caught up in this, and he didn't want his wife to go to prison. Fair enough. You're the prosecutor. You're sitting across the table by a gentleman by the name of Lanny Davis. You know he hates Trump. And so you press Cohen. Okay, 5 tax frauds, 1 bank fraud, 2 campaign frauds, and a partridge in a pear tree. You take it? We'll give you 3 to 5. I'll grab it. Yeah, take it. Take it. And so his plea agreement, which has no precedential value whatsoever, it's not an adjudication, it's not a determination by any court, then is used, what? For the media. The media say what? See that? He must be an unindicted co-conspirator. If Cohen's guilty, Trump must be guilty. Of what? Of campaign violation. But he didn't violate the campaign. Yeah, but Cohen and the prosecutors said they did. Who cares? Next up, the head of the National Enquirer and that business empire. We heard yesterday he was granted immunity. Immunity for what? Well, he testified in front of the grand jury. About what? We don't know. They don't tell us, but they know he testified, so the leaks are coming out. Well, the theory is, or at least the thinking is, he confirms what Cohen said, that Trump made these payments. Well, so what? The payments are perfectly legal. Well, no, you don't understand. Trump says that he didn't direct these payments to be made, that Cohen made the payments, and later he made the payments, and he violated the limits on personal contributions, and he violated the exclusion of corporate contributions. Whoa. Who says any of that occurred? Trump didn't make a corporate contribution to his campaign. His company, in part, his organization, in part, apparently paid one of the women for a non-disclosure agreement. And then he paid out of his pocket for another non-disclosure agreement. What does that have to do with campaign finance laws? Well, you see, the way we interpret it is, it influenced the election because he was trying to get rid of a negative story to make it a positive. Whoa. That's not what the law says. That's not what the law is. Well, prosecutor says it is, and Michael Cohen pled guilty to it. Must be the law. Now we have this guy, Weisselberg, a.k.a. Weaselberg. Been with the Trump Organization and the Trump Foundation, I suppose, for decades. Chief financial officer. Prosecution says now, at least one of the payments Trump made came out of his organization. Let's get a hold of this chief financial officer, Weisselberg. Let's shake him down. Let's threaten him. And then we'll offer immunity if he testifies against Trump. What do you mean testifies against Trump? Well, what it would mean is that he, too, can say that a payment came out of the Trump Organization, and, of course, it's our position that that payment was illegal, an illegal corporate contribution to a campaign. But it wasn't a contribution to a campaign. It was a payment for a non-disclosure agreement involving a matter that occurred prior to the campaign. Wow, that's not how we interpret it. You can interpret it any way you want. You haven't had it adjudicated. I know of nobody in the country who's been convicted of such a charge. No adjudication, no trial, just assertions and a plea agreement and 2 immunity agreements. So they're piling up. They're piling up these, what will be allegations against the President of the United States, even though they know they will never be adjudicated as applies to him. Never. Which is why this is such a disgusting outrage. He can't defend himself, the president, in a court of law, and he shouldn't, because he's trying to protect the office of the presidency and the Constitution. Our presidents will be in court all the time on criminal matters. You see, the Bill Clinton matter was a civil case. There was a criminal element to it, because in the course of the civil case, he lied to a federal judge. That's not this case. Everything we're talking about occurred prior to the time Donald Trump was president of the United States. Now, Mr. Mueller will put his report together. He will include what's going on in the Southern District, or he won't. The Democrats will pick it up if they take the House of Representatives and run with it anyway. And a mere plea agreement and 2 immunities they will claim our evidence of the president's violation of the campaign laws, even though there's been no trial and no adjudication, and there can't be, as applies to him. That's how devious and evil this is. But it gets worse. See, I could sit here and, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. No, I'm telling you what's going on. How is it worse? The Southern District of New York has now opened the back door to investigating the Trump Organization and the Trump Foundation. See how this works? You break down Cohen on campaign charges, among other things. You get the head of the National Enquirer to support Cohen's position. Otherwise, he's threatened with jail time. Then, because a payment that's perfectly legal came out of the Trump Organization, because after all, Trump does own the Trump Organization, but it's a corporation, comes out of the Trump Organization, the prosecutor claims that it's a violation of federal law. They threaten the CFO. He gets immunity. He complies with the prosecution. And now they get a hold of the Trump Organization. Now they get a hold of the Trump Organization. This all started by Mr. Mueller, who threw the case to his colleagues, who he knows well, in the Southern District of New York, because he knew that under the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, which I brought up multiple times on this microphone, if he goes so wide, then the president will be able, and others will be able, to make a serious and legitimate case all the way to the Supreme Court that everything Mueller has done is null and void. So he throws it to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, in Manhattan, who does his dirty work for him. Ultimately, to get into the Trump Organization. Everybody's missing this. I'm explaining it to you. This is a huge miscarriage of justice. It's incredible abuse of power by these prosecutors. They are politicizing these investigations. Mr. Mueller has closed his eyes to what the Clinton campaign and the DNC did, about the Russian dossier and all the rest of the list that's repeated ad nauseum. He hasn't even attempted to expand his investigation to include any of that. He hasn't even requested, apparently, to expand his investigation to include any of that. What this week's activities demonstrate out of the Southern District of New York is that this was always a Soviet-style prosecution. Always. Now, I know that offends some of my faint-of-heart conservatives who desperately want to be patted on the head and write columns for the New York Times or have columns written about them. Well, screw them. This is the time to be serious people. Serious people. I'll be right back. Ken Meyer, a.k.a. Flounder, if you look at his photo, he does little snippets for Mediaite. All the writers there do little snippets. Basically, Mediaite is a site that hawks mostly cable TV, puts clips up, and then puts a liberal twist on them. Not all of them, but most of them, the overwhelming number of them do. It's get Trump, anybody who supports Trump is an idiot, stuff like that. You can check it out. So there's this CNN legal analyst by the name of Renato Mariotti. Renato Mariotti. And he was on Twitter. Mediaite tells us, Flounder reports. And we're supposed to be very, very impressed because, you see, CNN's legal analyst, Renato Mariotti, he knows everything, and he's telling us what to worry about. Today, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg received immunity from federal prosecutors who investigated Michael Cohen. He says, off the bat, this tells us that Weisselberg had criminal liability. People who don't have criminal exposure don't need immunity. Now, That doesn't mean he had criminal liability. This guy's a legal analyst. It means he could have been threatened with criminal liability. He hasn't been found to have committed any crimes. He got immunity. Let's continue. People who don't have criminal exposure don't need immunity. No, people who are threatened by prosecutors do need immunity. According to the Wall Street Journal, Weisselberg received immunity and testified before the Manhattan grand jury earlier this year. The decision about when to give a witness immunity versus forcing them to plead guilty and get a deal to flip is a complicated one. If prosecutors didn't have enough evidence to charge Weisselberg and couldn't make their case without him, immunity was their only option. No, that wasn't their only option. Dropping the matter was another option. So at least he confesses it must have been very, very weak because they gave him immunity. They didn't force him to plead to some crimes. There can be no question that Weisselberg provided valuable testimony to prosecutors. Well, there's no doubt about that. Apparently they got him to sing, and dance and do whatever they needed him to do. Prosecutors don't give immunity blindly. They would have required Weisselberg's attorney to tell them what Weisselberg would say if he testified before they gave him immunity. Prosecutors wouldn't have given him immunity if the information provided by Weisselberg was not valuable, or if the information provided by Weisselberg was useful to the prosecution, not necessarily criminal. I want to continue with this because over at Mediaite they think this is fantastic, and this guy really is typical dummy. I'll be right back. Let's continue with this CNN analyst. Prosecutors would have given him immunity, that is, the CFO Trump operations, if the information provided was not valuable. So what did Weisselberg provide? It appears that he was asked about, for example, according to Weisselberg, he did not know that the retainer agreement with Cohen was meant to repay Cohen for money Cohen personally paid to Stormy Daniels. This suggests the payment was falsely described in Trump Organization financial records. See what I mean? And it doesn't suggest anything. In addition to any campaign finance violations Weisselberg may have been involved in, the creation of false financial cuts off. All right, I have to go on. It cuts off. In addition, the New York Attorney General is investigating whether there were false entries in the Trump Organization financial records. Weisselberg's testimony could be helpful in that investigation. In my view, his value to prosecutors is that he knows how the company runs. So now, with this phony campaign violations argument, now they're investigating the Trump Organization. This is really the headline today. Not all the rest of the crap you're reading. This is the headline today. They finally figured out how to break through the back door by going after the president's personal lawyer, by gathering all the information he has, claiming crime fraud exception. The guy apparently was a crook with these taxi medallions and tax fraud and so forth. So they swing in these campaign issues. Swinging in these campaign issues, they've decided what a campaign violation is without adjudication, without a trial, because they know Mr. Cohen, or rather Mr. Cohen buckled, and they know the President of the United States that can't occur. And so we're on the slippery slope. That would be invaluable testimony to show that Trump was aware of the payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. If Trump paid so much attention to each payment made by the Trump Organization, how could he have missed these large cash payments? Why does it matter if they're not campaign contributions? That's the fundamental point. And that brings us to perhaps the key that is on everyone's mind. Who is Weisselberg cooperating against? To be clear, Weisselberg likely has agreed to provide full cooperation to any Department of Justice component, including Mueller, in exchange for immunity. But Mueller passed this along, so Mueller wouldn't have anything to do with it. But at the time Weisselberg received immunity, prosecutors believed his testimony would be valuable because it would help them charge one or more people. So who did they think he would help them charge? Given the timing, it could have just been Cohen. Now, this is the CNN legal analyst. You can't charge the President of the United States. Clearly, Weisselberg's testimony helped the case against Cohen, but that doesn't mean he hasn't or won't implicate others, and he has to cooperate with the prosecutors going forward. Time will tell whether Weisselberg provides testimony against Trump and others. Then, what's interesting here is a guy by the name of George Conway jumps in, and they're very fascinated over at Media with George Conway. He's the husband of Kellyanne Conway. And Conway says it means that individual one needs a real lawyer. Now, I know of George Conway. I think I may have met him once or twice. He's Kellyanne Conway's husband. I've been quiet about this. But what the hell kind of husband is constantly making public statements that humiliate his wife or make his wife's job harder? This is a separate issue. This is a footnote, but since he keeps open his big fat mouth, I have a question for you, the American people. What kind of husband continues to tweet and tweet and tweet and trashes his wife's boss, and then his wife has to answer for it? Does that sound weird? Now, just a friendly piece of advice, Mr. Conway. If you don't think highly of your wife like millions and millions of us do, that should be a family matter. You shouldn't do it through your little tweets, and it's obvious to everybody what you're doing. You may actually have these opinions, but do you have no respect for your wife and your family? Just my opinion. Since he's out there, I guess I can comment on it. Everybody comments on everything about me, about Donald Trump, about all kinds of public figures. But it's very bizarre, don't you think? Don't you think, Mr. Producer? It's kind of messed up. Yeah, screwy. And he doesn't seem to give a damn. I mean, you do have children, pal. You really ought to be a little bit more protective of your wife and your family and your children, in my humble opinion. So if you're going to tweet about all this stuff, we can talk about you too. Keep it up. I could care less. It's of no consequence to me or the country. But since you're out there and you're in everybody's face, it just seems rather bizarre to me. So here we have it. CNN legal analyst Renato Mariotti has it all figured out and really underscores my point unwittingly that this is really about getting into the Trump organization. It's really about making sure, in fact, that Cohen does not get tried, that you cut your deal so you can wave around these so-called two campaign violations and keep using them and using them and using them to push and push and push. These are supposed to be prosecutors. They're supposed to be prosecutors. They are everywhere. The Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, campaign finance laws, they claim. The Manhattan Madam. All over the place. The one place they're not is Russia collusion. That now we're told, forget about that. That was a pretext. Forget about Russia collusion, the Russia with Trump and the Trump campaign. Oh yeah, Mueller will throw a few lines in there about the meeting that Donald Jr. had and so forth and so on. They have nothing. Nothing. They couldn't from an institutional basis from the get-go because it was a counterintelligence investigation, or a rather matter, not a criminal matter. And they tried to criminalize it. Let me add one other point. I know this seems overwhelming, but we have to deal with it. Jeff Sessions and his recusal. You know, I went back and really looked at this. Really looked at this. And why he recused himself. And at the time I said he should have recused himself. I was wrong. Wrong. I went back and I looked at this. Why did he recuse himself? Because he testified under oath during his confirmation hearing that he couldn't remember any meetings or any conversations or anything of the sort with any Russian official. Turns out in his Senate office, he had met with the ambassador from Russia. Turns out he later remembered that at the Republican National Convention, he'd bumped into the same guy, and in passing, they had a very non-substantive, very short, basically hello, goodbye. Maybe there was one other occasion. Al Franken pounded away, as did the media, that Jeff Sessions lied under oath, that Jeff Sessions really can't handle anything related to the campaign or Russia, that he was an early supporter of Trump's, that he campaigned for Trump, therefore he can't be nonpartisan and objective about any investigation, so recused himself. That is a really thin reed to crawl out on. That he worked in the Trump campaign? You have U.S. attorneys who worked in the Trump campaign. You have assistant special counsel who worked in the Hillary Clinton campaign, who gave her money, who gave Obama money. You have the number two official in that operation, the lieutenant to Mueller, Weissman, who was at the Hillary Clinton victory party. Unfortunately for him, there was no victory. They don't recuse themselves. They don't step aside. As a matter of fact, Mueller went out of his way to hire these partisans. But Jeff Sessions recuses himself. Why? I'm sorry, he had no ethical duty to do that. He had no ethical duty to do that. He wasn't involved in any specific activity that would warrant recusal. He was involved in the campaign. He had no association with Russians. So he copped out. I'm sure that's why the president is furious. And then you have the deputy attorney general who recommends that Comey be fired. Comey's fired, and the Comey firing triggers the same deputy attorney general to appoint a special counsel. This is why the president's upset. This isn't a matter of, we conservatives, we need to play by the rules and the rule of law. We are playing by the rules and the rule of law. And Jeff Sessions should step aside. He shouldn't force the president to do anything after the election, before the election. What he did was wrong. If you take a really sober look at it, look back at it, and analyze it, what he did was cowardly. What Rosenstein did in appointing Mueller was cowardly. And now the President of the United States has all this on his hands, this disastrous mess. Justice has gotten away from the Department of Justice. You have Mueller, who has a personal vendetta against Trump for firing his buddy. And now you can see that based on how he's conducting his investigation, how he's closed his eyes to the other side of the aisle completely and utterly. You have the Southern District of New York, where the U.S. attorney there has recused himself. And they're very angry with Trump because the former head of that office, the U.S. attorney, prosecuted Dinesh D'Souza on a nothing-burger campaign violation. Sound familiar? For which D'Souza did 20 months in federal prison. Obama never did any time in federal prison. They took foreign money. Hillary Clinton never did any time in federal prison. She violated the Espionage Act. So these same people, when Donald Trump gave a full and complete pardon to Dinesh D'Souza, they're furious with him. They want a piece of him. These are things that need to be brought up. They're tyrannical. And so now you have prosecutors in these offices playing politics, partisan politics. And they can manipulate the system the way the Southern District of New York has manipulated the system with Cohen and these campaign charges to get into the back door of the Trump organization. What next? The Trump tax returns, which has been the demand of the media and the Democrats from day one? This is an attack on the Republic. It is almost impossible for a president of the United States to fully focus on his responsibilities, for which he has taken an oath. They're trying to cripple him, burden him, sabotage him. This is our republic. There was a fair and square election. He won the presidency. They are furious with the fact that he won the presidency. But they don't get to turn this into the old Soviet Union. And that's what they're doing. And the media not only don't sit back, the media are participating in it. Because ideologically, and they know I'm right. Tapper knows I'm right. He was raised as a leftist. Don Lemon knows I'm right, although he's too stupid to know, actually. They all know I'm right. That they are driven by ideology. They don't like Trump, and they want him removed. Which is why the media keeps pushing impeachment, 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 more than the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, quite frankly. So now a former general counsel of the FEC, who is a leftist, in my humble opinion, he's out there, of course, and he's saying, well, of course these were crimes. I mean, quote, what he admitted to, that is, Cohen, is a crime. It's a violation of law, and he pled to a criminal violation of law, therefore it's a crime. He pled to a crime. What a knucklehead. Usually there's no allegation that it's knowing and willful, because a lot of these matters are handled really as civil matters, because campaigns always violate laws. But once you cross over to knowing and willful, they can be criminal. Really? Name one. Name one case like this that was criminal. And so you have a lot of these cases. Obama's campaign was fined $375,000 by the FEC, one of the largest fines leveled against a presidential campaign ever, for missing reporting deadlines on $1.8 million in contributions. But there were no criminal charges there. And what does this former general counsel liberal say? What did he tell CNN? There's no comparison. There's no presidential campaign that I'm aware of that hasn't had campaign finance violations. A lot of money flows through them, and they almost all have some violations. What is unusual is having a violation where it's been alleged that the candidate and now president was allegedly involved and personally directed the violation. Wow. Isn't that a compelling legal argument? A lot of money flows through campaigns, and they almost all have some violations. Here's the real difference. No money flowed through the Trump campaign. It had nothing to do with direct campaign costs. No money flowed out of the Trump campaign. No campaign dollars were used of any kind. He entered into a non-disclosure agreement with two people. They received money out of his pocket or out of his organization. There is no campaign issue, period. I'll be right back. The Attorney General's office in New York now wants to investigate the Trump Organization. The Manhattan District Attorney wants to investigate the Trump Organization. You don't think this is coordinated? This is from The Hill. Prosecutors in Manhattan are reportedly considering pushing for criminal charges against the Trump Organization and two top company officials over a hush money payment linked to former longtime Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. See where this is going? Local prosecutors, state prosecutors, federal prosecutors. The New York Times has reported that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is considering charges over the company's accounting of Cohen's payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels' porno. The officials stressed the review of the matter is in its earliest stages and no decision has been made in personal charges. So the different levels of prosecutors are working with each other. Now, the Manhattan DA is a left-wing Democrat. The Attorney General, they're having a race, I believe, but in New York is a left-wing Democrat. Whatever happened to the Clinton Foundation? Remember all their failed and tax filings, how they concealed contributions? Does anybody remember a local, state, or federal criminal investigation into them? Of course not. And in the Hillary Clinton investigation, immunity was given to protect witnesses against Hillary Clinton. Remember? The Times reported that the state investigation, state, local, federal, would primarily focus on how the Trump Organization reimbursed Cohen after he arranged the hush money payment of $130,000 to Daniels shortly before the 2016 election. the inflammatory language, hush money, it is a non-disclosure agreement. And what's interesting to me here is these women apparently violated these agreements. And at least one of them threatened Trump. You know, it's called blackmail. But nobody talks about it but me. Cohen, President Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Lanny Davis isn't called a fixer. His entire career, he's had his head up either Bill or Hillary's butts. And that's pretty big. And he's a fixer, a lobbyist. And he did another fixer job here with Cohen in order to try and get Trump. So look at how the media use line. This is Justin Wise, who is not, over at the Hill. So Cohen is a fixer. And, of course, Lanny Davis is a professional, a lawyer. He's a man of good standing. Anyway, Cohen, President Trump's former lawyer and fixer, pleaded guilty earlier this week to bank and tax fraud as well as campaign finance violations related to his payment to Daniels and a former Playboy model who alleged to have had affairs with Trump in 2006. And the Times reported that the Trump Organization filed its reimbursement to Cohen for the Daniels payment as a legal expense. It is a legal expense. It's a non-disclosure agreement. Federal prosecutors have also claimed that the reimbursements came in the form of sham legal invoices. Cohen told a judge this week that the payment was made with the intent of buying Daniel's silence. Of course, that's what a national non-disclosure agreement's about: buying somebody's silence. Many of you who are employed and you have contracts, go ahead and check your non-disclosure section. Many of you who've left a job, left government, whatever, you're forced to file a non-disclosure agreement. If I could get this little patsy, this deputy tough guy U.S. attorney on my program, I'd ask him if his office has ever had non-disclosure agreements. Hush money. Hush money. The Times noted that such charges would be potentially significant due to the fact that a possible probe would be run by the state of New York, and Trump has no power to pardon people or corporate entities convicted of state crimes. And that's true, which is why they're doing it. This is a political attack on the candidate, on the office of the presidency. And I want the District Attorney of Manhattan, I want the Attorney General of New York, and I want the Deputy United States Attorney to understand something. You have now unleashed powers that were only used by the likes of the old Soviet Union. You've now unleashed powers within our politics. We're Republican district attorneys. We're Republican attorneys general. We're Republican United States attorneys. We'll now target Democrat candidates and Democrat politicians, including Democrat presidents. You have just taken this to a level that you don't even comprehend. And what you've done is you've damaged the republic. The longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization receiving immunity from federal prosecutor could be a momentous turn of events for President Trump, according to biographer Tim O'Brien. What the hell does biographer Tim O'Brien know about anything? O'Brien, who penned the nonfiction Trump Nation in 2005, wrote in Bloomberg News on Friday that Alan Weisselberg's immunity in the investigation into former Trump attorney Michael Cohen could unearth a great deal about the president's past financial dealings. And that's the intent. If you're a wealthy person and a Republican, and you win the presidency, look what they do to you. Look what they've done. I hope you all have a good, strong feel for this, because this is really, truly outrageous. It's an abomination. The piling up of these legal offices, these prosecutors against a president. He didn't violate campaign laws. Even if he did, which he did not, these are civil matters, not typically criminal matters. But he didn't. He can pay for it out of his pocket. He can pay for it out of his organization. Oh, well, then we need to check that out, say the Democrat prosecutor. Oh, now we need to really look. And did he account for it on his taxes? Now we need 25 years of his taxes to tell. Oh, yeah, we got this one figured out. Absolutely appalling. The Manhattan District Attorney, the New York Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District that's furious with Trump for pardoning Dinesh D'Souza, among other things, working together and no doubt coordinating with Mueller. Now, should Mueller, stay with me because we're taking it all on, should Mueller really overstep his bounds and subpoena the President of the United States for testimony, even though a president cannot be indicted, for the purpose of creating a crime in his firing of Comey and others? I think as a result of what the U.S. Attorney's Office has done in the Southern District, as a result of what's going on in the Attorney General's office in New York, the District Attorney's Office in Manhattan, an extraordinarily strong case can now be made all the way to the Supreme Court about what's taking place in this country and how we have a local government, a state government, and now a U.S. Attorney's Office, not to mention a special counsel's office, making it virtually impossible for a president to focus fully and effectively on his job. And that these are, in fact, Lilliputians, miscreants, nobodies. We're trying to take down the president in order to reverse the course of the election. If anybody was somehow deluded to what's taking place here, your eyes should now be wide open. I'll be right back. Now, you've heard this said before, but it's worth repeating. And I've said it before myself. Beria was Stalin's KGB chief. Beria, B-E-R-I-A. He was Stalin's KGB chief. And he said, infamously, show me the man, I'll find you the crime. This is where we are today, ladies and gentlemen. Show me the man, I'll find you the crime. There are all kinds of crimes out there. Hillary Clinton, but they protected her. The Clinton Foundation, I don't believe that's ever been subjected to a criminal investigation. But when you have the prosecutors on your side, let me just say this to the Deputy U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. Let it be heard wide. Let the left spread this. Let's inform our fellow citizens of the tyranny that's afoot. Mr. Deputy U.S. Attorney, you remind me of Beria. Show me the man, I'll find you the crime. I watched you with your little hit job press conference. You are a cold dude. You are a cold dude. You like to watch people sweat, don't you? You like the torture of threatening people with prison. You like to break a strong man and watch him weep, don't you? You've spent decades doing that, haven't you? Oh, I'm sure you've chased many a criminal. But how many innocent people have you threatened with the power of your office? Because you were lucky enough to be hired through our civil service system at the Southern District of New York at one point. And you've clawed your way nearly to the top of the civil service positions in the Southern District of New York. The political position is the U.S. Attorney. The Deputy U.S. Attorney is not. And notice, by the way, Attorney General Sessions, the political position is the U.S. Attorney. We don't just turn it over to bureaucrats. But what's taking place, the District Attorney in Manhattan, Beria. The Attorney General in New York, Beria. Show me the man, I'll find you the crime. There's so many rules and laws, tax provisions, regulations, and so forth and so on. It's not hard. But what you expect in these prosecutors is judgment and common sense and temperament and a sense that their power can be abused, which is exactly what's taking place. They're excited. They're almost obsessed. They're in a frenzy to see who first can get Trump and take him down. There are consequences, ladies and gentlemen, for this kind of rogue behavior. There are consequences for calling innocent behavior a crime. There are consequences for forcing men to plead to crimes that they didn't commit. For threatening men, and by men I mean men and women, for threatening men with possible criminal charges and giving them immunity in exchange for selling their souls. We need criminal justice reform, all right, I would tell my Republican friends and their Democrat colleagues, but we're looking at all the wrong places. The politicization of these offices in one direction cannot stand if this republic is to stand. Cannot stand if this republic is to stand. You know, you have people out there who are saying, look, you got to let the investigative process work or we're no better than them. But we are better than them. We have no problem with the investigative process working. Our problem is it's not working. Our problem is it's corrupt. We're watching with our own two eyes. We're listening with our own two ears. We see it. We hear it. It's corrupt. Just like the media are corrupt. They're ideological. They're partisan. They have winners and losers. And they know I'm right. But they'll pretend that I'm not. Unlike them, you know where I stand. Unlike them, you know my positions. Unlike them, you know my principles. I would never lower myself to pretend that I'm a journalist knowing I'm not. Like the rest of them do on CNN and MSNBC and a few here and there on our favorite cable channel. What is immoral is when the poison of this kind of corrupt mentality spreads throughout the land. People are talking a lot about morality when it comes to Trump and these two women. Well, let's talk about morality when it comes to Trump. Is what is being done to Trump moral? Let alone constitutional. Of course not. What do you think the framers of our Constitution would think? If you had a local prosecutor, a state prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, and then some concoction called a special counsel, all investigating a president of the United States who hasn't committed any crimes. I told you yesterday, impeachment applies to conduct of the president while he's in office. None of this has anything to do with the president of the United States while he's in office. I think the left is playing with fire, but they don't realize it. I think the media are playing with fire, but they don't realize it. They wrap themselves in the Constitution, which they despise. They claim that they're the truth tellers when they're liars. They're liars about who they are and what their networks are doing. I have tried many times to get the Deputy Attorney General of the United States on this program. And the press person for the Department of Justice, who says she was the press person when Ashcroft was president, too, in the Office of Public Affairs, says it's been the practice of the Department of Justice that these officials don't talk about cases that have been filed. Those cases speak for themselves. I don't want to talk about a case that's been filed. I want to talk about the appointment of Robert Mueller. I want to talk about all these things. He will not make himself available. How's that for a public official? He won't make himself available? Is there some ethical issue? There are no ethical issues. Is there some legal problem? that he can't speak to me? There are no legal obstacles. He is a coward. He is a coward. He thinks he's above the law. And he will not talk to me because I've been critical of him. Some public official. I'll be right back. You know, ladies and gentlemen, standing up for your principles and applying them to events that are taking place doesn't mean that you're selling out. Doesn't even mean you're a partisan hack. No, it means you're doing the right thing. You're following your conscience. Charlie, San Jose, California, the great KSFO. Go.
Good afternoon, great one. Sessions was the Democrats at the time were demanding either he recuse himself or appoint a special prosecutor. Instead of recusing himself, he should have picked a special prosecutor who was decent and honest and just told him, go out and find Russian collusion, nothing else, limited scope, and this thing would have been over after 3 more months.
Now, let's just slow down, Charlie, because you've raised a very smart point. You're saying, why did Sessions recuse himself? All he had to do is himself appoint a special counsel. Now, Sessions' response would be, yes, but that special counsel would report to me ultimately. What do you say to that?
Oh, I would say, unless it had something directly to do with him, so what? Then if it had something to do with him, then he would recuse himself at that point, and he could designate somebody other than Rosenstein, too. The president has the power to designate somebody else as acting attorney general.
No, he does not. There is a statutory succession as a matter of law, so that's not correct. But that said, I think you make a very, very interesting point. Thank you for your call. So those who say Sessions should have recused himself, I think they have to explain themselves. I really do. Based on what? He was involved in the campaign? No, that's absurd. President appoints people all the time, as have other presidents, to high positions who've been involved in their campaign, have been donors, what have you. So that in and of itself isn't enough. Because he met the Russian ambassador a few times and says he never discussed the campaign with the Russian ambassador, surely that can't be the basis for recusal. So what was the basis for recusal? I think all these people on TV and radio, left, right, and otherwise, who say it was the right thing for I've gone back and thought about this. I went back and specifically looked at this. So what that justifies Sessions recusing himself, other than he didn't like coming under attack by the sexual harasser who has since left the Senate, and by the media? And, of course, now he's not attacked by the media. And on what basis exactly did the Deputy Attorney General appoint a special counsel when there was no underlying crime, which is a requirement of such an appointment? Of course these questions need to be asked. Of course they're legitimate questions. It boggles the mind what was happening here, what took place here. The President of the United States has a right to have individuals in his cabinet that support his agenda. And supporting the president's agenda does not conflict with their legal obligations. A friend of mine just tweeted out, maybe Jeff Sessions knows more than these commentators on Fox and so forth, and maybe that's why they haven't charged Hillary Clinton. And I say to my friend, have you not been following this? Have you not been following this? The entire investigation of Hillary Clinton was obstructed by Comey, by Strzok, and so forth and so on. How would Jeff Sessions know more? How would he know more? On what basis would he know more? He's recused himself on Russia. He's recused himself on interference in the election. Is he involved, or was he involved in the Hillary Clinton investigation? No, it predates him. Well, maybe he was briefed. There's no indication of that whatsoever. I would say this to my dear friend. Maybe Sessions is wrong. Have you considered that? Maybe he doesn't know a whole lot. Because he doesn't want to know a whole lot. Or he wasn't there at the time. Who knows? Let's take another call. Let's go to Barrett, Pinehurst, North Carolina, on the great WEEB. How are you?
Great. Thank you for taking my call. Here's my thesis. Mueller has nothing in terms of Russian collusion, so he needs something else. His something else is creating the illusion that there is inappropriate influence of the election by President Trump and his campaign. Why is he doing this? Because the media will carry the water on this for the next 2 months, and his objective is, ironically, to inappropriately influence the outcome of the campaign on the basis of a false allegation that he knows is a false allegation, but it will carry itself on. So my second comment before you respond to that too is, how do you recommend that there be a communication strategy to get to the rank and file American people?
All right, sir. I'm not a marketing expert. I'm getting to the rank and file American people every day. Why do you think I'm taking my time, day in and day out, and walking through this? So is there some other plan out there that maybe you can come up with on it? That's not me. That's not my responsibility. I don't know how to do it. I can only go on Fox so many times a week. I can only do LEVIN TV so many times a week. I can only do this radio show so many times a week. I don't know what other plan they can develop for that. That's number one. Number two, obviously, this is intended to affect the midterm election. You think the Democrat Manhattan district attorney, or the Democrat attorney general, or the Democrats dressed up, or the liberal Republicans dressed up as civil servants in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're out to get Trump, they're out to influence the election, they're out to affect what already took place, the past election. That's the whole point. Thank you for your call, in my humble opinion. Abraham, New York City, the great WABC. Go.
How you doing, Mark?
Okay.
All right, so I'm calling in. I was actually thinking for a while about why Michael Cohen would record his own client. I'm an attorney myself, and this made absolutely no sense to me. I was having a few thoughts in my mind the other day, and I think it is relevant here because what Michael Cohen was charged with, on top of paying off Stormy Daniel, was bank fraud charges. So what I started thinking about was maybe Michael Cohen intentionally recorded Donald Trump, and we can all agree that that tape is completely decryptic and it actually means or says nothing. Intentionally recorded him in an attempt to, when eventually getting caught for bank fraud charges, to use it in an attempt to extort President Trump out of a pardon. Not saying that would work, but
well, you know what? I agree with the first half, because this is fascinating. The first half, that he taped them, or taped Trump and maybe other clients, to extort a pardon. I don't think that would work. But I think, hold on. But I think to wave in the face of prosecutors once they caught him not paying taxes and stealing money.
Yeah. You know,
so I agree with you in part, but it seems rational to me. If you have that kind of an evil mind that you're taping clients, which is utterly unethical, you're taping them for a reason. Now, he knew that he hadn't paid his taxes. He knew that he lied on his loan form. He knew that he owed millions and millions of dollars. And so he would have something to negotiate with the prosecutors. To that extent, the beginning, I agree with you. But I think you'll agree my second part of what you said is probably what he was doing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my part was based on speculation, obviously, but I do agree that he was using it for some type of leverage, and I think it's even more evidence that Donald Trump did not have the criminal intent necessary to commit this crime, because the tape was so decryptic that if Donald Trump really knew what was going on and Michael Cohen was recording him, he would want to actually record the criminal part of it and not just some decryptic message of take care of this.
Mm-hmm. All right, Counselor, pretty good. I appreciate it. Chris, New York City, also the great WABC. Quickly, go, sir.
On the issue of how this immunity is being reported, is it not the case that anyone who goes in the grand jury, a federal grand jury, or a New York State grand jury is automatically granted immunity? In other words,
No.
You can't be compelled to testify.
But you're not automatically granted immunity. That's not correct.
In a New York State grand jury, you are, unless you waive it.
Okay, well, I'm not familiar with the New York State grand jury. I'm familiar with federal grand juries.
But
everybody who gets in front of a grand jury, no, immunity is not provided to an individual who who testifies in front of a grand jury as a matter of course.
Unless the person says...
That's why people plead the fifth. That's why people say no. That's why people try to negotiate conditions. That's why all that stuff goes on. Otherwise, people would happily testify in front of a federal grand jury.
Yes, but I'm just trying to make the point that the idea that someone is granted immunity, which sounds like, oh, maybe this person did something nefarious, is often just related to the fact that they're bargaining their way in front of a grand jury. It's not a...
Well, okay, but you've changed your position. I'm telling you that you do not get an automatic immunity for testifying in front of a federal grand jury. As a matter of fact, you can testify in front of a federal grand jury, and what you say may well be used against you, unless you get immunity.
Okay.
All right?
But the statute does allow them to give you to seek to give you immunity if they think you're likely to invoke the Fifth Amendment. No?
Well, first of all, it's not a statute. It's the Constitution. And they're happy to negotiate your rights away or to protect you or whatever. It depends what they're seeking to do. I can't speak to New York and what their grand jury requirements are, but it would seem very strange to me that any state would grant people automatically immunity if they testify in front of grand juries. That just seems very weird to me. All right, my friend, thanks for your call. We'll be right back. Where's Omarosa? Does anybody know where Omarosa is? She must be boiling mad right now. I mean, all that taping and all that spewing and all that hate and all those lies. She's got a big book out there. Where is she? And where is John Brennan? Remember his security clearance was yanked? And everybody was all a Twitter. Furious. What happened? All of a sudden the fury's gone. Oh, I see. Michael Cohen. I just saw an individual on our favorite cable channel during the break. They call them Democratic strategists. I don't know what that means. What is a Democratic strategist? A liar? A BS artist? But anyway, she said that Trump is a unindicted co-conspirator. That is outrageous. There's no such thing. Even the clown deputy U.S. attorney at the Southern District in New York didn't use the phrase unindicted co-conspirator. Maybe the Democrats who run the Manhattan District Attorney's Office will. Maybe the Democrats who run the Attorney General's office in New York will. He's not an unindicted co-conspirator. Don't you think these Democrats would love to imprison so many of us? The things they say about us, racists, white supremacists, xenophobes, that we are less intelligent than they are. I mean, these leftists are a vile bunch. They are a radical bunch of dangerous people, in my humble opinion, particularly their leaders. When you call out the media for being fake, which so much of it is, you're attacked as attacking freedom of the press when you're using free speech. And how so? Are any of these corporations in danger? Bezos buys the Washington Compost, and nobody can do anything about the Washington Compost. The New York Slimes, you've got a billionaire in Mexico who owns like 20% of it. Nobody's going to be able to touch the New York Slimes. Comcast owns NBC, MSNBC. You can go on and on and on. Nobody's threatening them. They're beclowning themselves. They're undermining their own credibility.